I call to order the October 8th, 2025 meeting of the Seclusion Working Group, and a quorum is present. First thing on our agenda is the approval of the previous meeting minutes. Has everyone had a chance to review the minutes from our previous meeting? And is there a motion to approve the previous meeting minutes? Thank you. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of approving the last meeting minutes, say aye. Aye. Any opposed, say no. Motion prevails, the minutes are approved. Next on our agenda is a presentation from Minneapolis Public Schools. I believe Dr. Liz Keenan is presenting on behalf of the district. Dr. Keenan, whenever you're ready.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members. My name is Dr. Elizabeth Keenan, and I am the Associate Superintendent for Special Education and Student Support Services here in Minneapolis and for Minneapolis Public Schools. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about our non-seclusionary programming that we've been working on here in our school system, and we'll take any further questions from the members after the presentation. So this is me. We'll move on from there. So just want to talk a little bit about Minneapolis Public Schools and our demographics. So we are a very diverse school system. We have about 30,000 students. We have a population, and one of the largest populations are our American Indian students as 5%. Our second largest population is our African American and Black students, and our white student population is 36%. We also have about 18% of our students are identified in special ed or having special needs services. And then we have 22% of our students are receiving English language services, and 56% of our students are under the free and reduced lunch. So our values in Minneapolis Public Schools has really been around how to support students, and since 2011, we have not provided seclusionary practices within the school system. The belief was that it does not really address the root cause of our students and students' behavior. We believed it was also how do we get better at supporting and coping with strategies to address the behavior for students versus reducing the amount of restricting their ability to be able to work through that. And the big focus for us has always been on how to de-escalate systems for our students, how do we de-escalate a situation, and really work with our staff to support students so that when they're dysregulated, when they're having difficulties with their behavior, that staff are prepared to address and work through that with the students. So really it's about understanding that yes, students will have crisis situations. However, it's about how the staff can support the student during that time. So what we've really focused in on is how to build in more positive behavior supports within the systems of the frameworks. That varies with either we have restorative practices. We've also added in about 50 sensory rooms that are calming spaces for all students to participate in. We have a process for students to go in there and a protocol to document when students are in there and when staff are there supporting them. So the approach is really to provide that calming space for students and utilizing that space on a proactive basis so that we're not teaching the student how to go there in a time of crisis, but to utilize that space when they're not in a crisis so that when they are there, that they can go there and calm down. And then the other piece we've been working on over the last several years is we vamping the training of our staff. We have about 1,500 of our staff in the training around foundations, which is a nonviolence crisis prevention program that Minneapolis had put into place 2 years ago. And it really is about those de-escalation techniques. So like I said, we have our sensory rooms, over 50 of them, and we put those in over the last 2 years. And we've been really working on, how to build out those supports for students in there. This is the first year where we really had all of those programs up and running in each one of the classrooms. So we are making sure that we're taking documentation and we are monitoring when students are in there and for how long they are. But we're also tracking to see when students are using them and for what the process is for them to go into them. So it's going to really kind of give us some additional data on how these rooms are supporting our student needs. The foundations program, like I said, 1,500 staff are trained. We do weekly trainings with our staff, and then these really, the training is really about, not about the restraining of students, it's about how to talk with students, how to de-escalate the situation, how to staff and engage with students when they're escalated, and to really kind of work through those pieces when a student is highly elevated, to understand what that emotion is looking like and to support the student in their need. We also have been focusing more on how our social workers are supporting our students. And this year, we're really targeting how social workers are providing additional supports and services for our students who are in need of those direct social emotional learning supports. So by providing groups therapy and individual therapy groups with our students. And then we have a mental health crisis team. That team works additionally with our students directly. They have students that they work in our schools, but they also go out to schools when there are situations that their students are in need of additional supports. This is a little bit more information about our foundations, because a lot of districts use a process. It's called the Nonviolence Crisis Prevention Programming, CPI, and 2 years ago, like I said, Minneapolis went to their own foundations program around this. And what we really looked at is how do we support students during this time. It's really based on how to de-escalate, how to make sure everybody's safe, making sure that the student is in a safe situation. How do we work through students when they aren't in a safe situation? And it's also making sure that when there are emergencies, that staff are prepared to be able to deal with those emergency situations in a safe way. This really built around our MPS climate framework is what we call it. And so we really wanted to make sure that we're supporting the climate in there, because a lot of times when there's a situation, there's a lot of things that happen afterwards, and it's about restoring them and preparing students, like how do you re-enter into the classroom or the school after a situation. And so we're really focusing on not just the incident, but how to restore students going back into the environment, into the learning environment. And so that's really what we've been working on over the last several years. But since 2011, there's been a lot of work happening in Minneapolis Public Schools around focusing on the restrictive, not the restrictive procedures, but more on the supports of students and building out more of that sensory environment and dealing with students and their social emotional learning versus the seclusionary practices.
Thank you, Dr. Keenan. I wanted to ask you a few questions about the Foundations program. When you introduced the topic at the beginning of your presentation, you called it a non-something crisis prevention program. Can you tell me a little bit more about what that is?
Yes, yes, Madam Chair. The Nonviolence Crisis Prevention Program it's a certified program. It is a program that a lot of districts utilize here in Minnesota. Minneapolis used it up until last year, and it really talks about, it goes through a whole full day training with staff, and it talks about how to work with students, how to make sure that you're de-escalating, how to staff interject and support students. The big thing is, like, you don't want too many staff members at a scene in a certain situation talking at the student all at one time. Identify one person who knows that student. How do you work with that student to calm them down? They also do, towards the end of the training, they do talk about restrictive procedures on how do you do holds that are acceptable to support students. And to make sure that, like, if you have a basket hold or if you have a two-person hold, how does that do to ensure that the safety not only for the staff but for the student? And so that really is making sure that all staff that are trained that are to support students in that manner are trained in a way to be able to support the students. That the safety is important for not only our students, but for the staff in these situations. But we also want to reemphasize that that big portion of that training is really about how the staff are interacting and how to de-escalate and allow that student to come down from an escalated situation.
Thank you. You talked about the sensory rooms that you have built out and that you've had for the last 2 years. And I'm curious if a student is directed to a sensory room and it's not having the desired effect and the student wants to leave, what are staff instructed to do then?
Madam Chair, the students at that time, the staff would be able to redirect the student or to be able to, the sensory rooms are not there to restrict students in their movements. It's to be able to allow them to calm down. But if the student is ready to move, then they will move the student out of there. So they're really to be the proactive pieces of it. And like I said, we want to make sure that we're teaching students to go in there first so that they understand the calming effects of what works for them. And so if a student is dysregulated, they want to go there, they choose to go there, then we bring them there. But when they're ready to leave, then they're ready to leave that room.
And I guess my question was not when they're ready to leave because they've calmed down, but because the situation continues to escalate. What is the next step?
Madam Chair, at that point, the staff will have to assess what the safety pieces are that. A lot of times in those rooms, there's a lot of other things in there, so you want to make sure that you are limiting. If a student is really dysregulated, you don't want to make them sure that they're not throwing things or they have accessibility to things that be thrown. So at times like that, if a student needs to be removed and move out of that room, then that's what the staff would do. And what we do with our foundations program is to really kind of how do we move a student from a situation in any classroom, and the same thing would happen in those sensory rooms. And like I said, those rooms are not intended to restrict student movements. Those rooms are really intended to help students de-escalate.
And I think we heard, at our last meeting, we heard a presentation from a few districts who do continue to use seclusion and have built into their program everything that you talked about. De-escalation strategies, student supports, calming strategies, sensory rooms. And as I'm looking at your presentation, if we go back one slide to staff training, the very last bullet point, as a last resort in an emergency, the appropriate way to use physical intervention and follow-up action steps when these restrictive measures must be used. This is the focus of this working group. Everything that you talked about, the de-escalation, the welcoming of students, the crisis intervention, the teachers understanding the students, the staff doing what's best for the students is something that's done across the board. And what we're talking about here in this working group is this last bullet point. So I guess my question is, and I think I asked for this data, I don't know if we have it, how many uses of physical intervention have been used in Minneapolis School District over the course of the last school year? And how many injuries resulted from that staff and student?
Madam Chair, I don't have that information directly with me, but we can absolutely follow up on that.
And is it my understanding then, in an emergency situation as a last resort, which is the focus of this working group, physical holds are used and restrictive procedures are used on students in Minneapolis public schools?
Madam Chair, yes. And as the protocol following the state statute, we have to register every time that happens.
In the case where a physical hold is used on a student, but they are unable to re-regulate their behavior, and staff are getting injured or are in danger of getting injured, or the student is getting injured or in danger of getting injured, is law enforcement ever called to come and step in the situation?
There, I don't know, I can only comment on the moments that I've been in the district since June. There has been one incident where we've had to call in the emergency support services, our EMS, and we have those internally in our district. They support they are familiar with our the foundations programs, so that we work with them. We haven't, I will double check to see, but I will get that information around if we've had to call in the outside police department to support our students.
You said you have EMS internally in your district. Can you talk more about that? Explain that to me.
So they, Madam Chair, they are individuals who are our emergency security support system within in the school system. And then if there's an emergency, if the school can't handle the situation, they come out and support. If a student has eloped, or if a student is, if the school needs additional support staff to help with an emergency, they go out to the schools.
And what do they do when they get there? What does that support look like?
Madam Chair, generally what they will do is they will take the direction of what's going on in the schools. They are not directed to do the hands-on pieces, or they are there to support and to make sure that the safety of the school is intact. So they will there and provide additional supports if they need to have students, if there's a situation that's happening at the school, they'll help make sure that there's the students and the rest of the students are safe. So generally, the direction with them is to the staff that's most familiar with the student, work with that student, but they're more there to help externally for the other students in the school.
You said you've been in this position since June of 2025? Mm-hmm. And have you been within the Minneapolis School District prior to that time, or are you brand new to the district?
I am brand new to the district.
Part of the information I requested in asking for Minneapolis to present before this working group was information on the number of physical holds used, injuries sustained by students and by staff. I'd asked for data on physical holds both before seclusion was eliminated and after. And I also wanted information on the number of law enforcement visits to schools when incidents couldn't be controlled and when EMS had been called. And it sounds like either you didn't get that information or you weren't able to prepare it in time. My request would be that that information be gathered and provided to this working group.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Are there any questions from members? Is one word.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Dr. Keenan, thank you. I am just curious, the MPS Foundations training, when you, the physical intervention component, like you had talked about, you had used CPI to date. Many of us in the state use CPI, and there's very few physical intervention programs available to public schools. So did you create your own physical holding practices? Are those based in CPI or other, commonly used programs? I'm very curious about your local procedure in that regard, specific to the physical holding.
Dr. Keenan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So it is very much modeled in conjunction with the CPI, but it is modeled in terms of what is approved within the state for the restrictive procedure pieces of it. From the understanding of it is that they did work alongside with MDE to make sure that this is within the protocol of it. It really was, the approach with it was to ensure that we are continuing with the safety pieces and the volume of the students and the staff, that the volume of staff that were required to be supported And in order to do that, that's why they took it more internally, because it's a large system, 30,000 students, about 1,500 staff being trained on this. So that's really, it's still modeled off of very similar aspects around CPI, but it's also making sure that it's within the scope of our developed foundations and that the holds and that our approval, those are approved holds within the construct of that.
Anything further?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So did you run those physical holding, like those specific physical holds that you're using? Were those then approved through MDE? And are those, just that specific part of your framework, is that something that's available to the working group as part of our information that we're reviewing? Similar to how we could, gather that information through CPI or Handle with Care or PCM, those other agencies.
Dr. Keenan.
Madam Chair, thank you. Yes, we can provide that information around it. And it's customized to Minneapolis Public Schools, but it's very familiar and similar.
Mr. Haverman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good to see you, Dr. Keenan. I guess my question revolves around the topic of trauma, which is also on that second to last slide that I think is still up. When you have students, which I'm sure you do, that are that have a history of going hands-on, will just re-trigger a lot of trauma that they've come from as well. This could be just me not understanding what Foundations is or how it addresses that, but like we have now UCARU on our end on the proactive side, and we still have seclusion as a tool that we'll use in some cases because we don't want to go hands-on because of some of that. How does Foundations or how does Minneapolis Public School address that?
Dr. Keenan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, very similar to the protocols that you've used in the past. That's very much modeled off of that. And it really emphasizes how to work through the trauma pieces. Like I said, what is the reentry pieces? How do you recover where a student is at? How do we understand where students, what's their triggers for them, and making sure staff are aware of it. That's what the full day program goes through, and it's starting out from that very basis, and then at the very end is when we start to talk about the restricted part of it with the physical holds, but it's really emphasizing how to redirect, how to re-support, and how to work through the trauma pieces with the students. Because what you were saying is absolutely correct, because if a student, the restraining process is not only traumatizing for students, but it's also traumatizing for staff. And to be able to use that as a last resort, there are other options to be able to get to prior to that.
I'll get to you. We have a question online. Representative Sensimura.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Can you hear me?
You're loud and clear.
Okay, great. So thank you so much. And thank you, Ms. Keenan, for presenting. And I'm a state representative from Minneapolis, so welcome to the district. And thank you for being here today. I think this is a little bit of a follow-up to Chair Seeberger. Would love to see that data. My understanding, just from what I know from the folks that I have talked to, in Minneapolis, is that over time, I think in the district, this largely feels like a positive change, getting rid of the seclusion rooms. And that, as I understand it, our data around the number of restraints used is trending in a positive direction. So would love to be able to see that data and share it with the committee. And this question might be a little challenging for you to answer since you are new to the district, but as I understand it, Minneapolis has not used seclusion rooms since 2011. So, that is a change that we're talking about for other districts across the state that Minneapolis has done for a number of years. And I'm wondering if you would be able to speak to, and maybe if you are not able to, being able to follow up with some data or some anecdotes from the district, just about, how did the district see the impacts of that change over time? I know anytime we are implementing implementing new procedures or regulations, oftentimes in the first few years, there are challenges that come up. There are tweaks that need to be made. I definitely know that one of the things that we talk about is what are the new resources that schools may need to support that change. So it would be helpful to kind of hear about that journey for MPS. Like, what did MPS see over time? Were the first couple years rocky, and now, almost 15 years in, it feels like it was the right thing for the district to do. So if you could speak to that journey at all, and if you can't, maybe, being able to follow up with that. Thank you.
Dr. Keenan, any response?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I turned it to this slide because going back to 2011, yes, we can look to see if we can gather that data, what it will look like for the physical holds and the documentation around that. We can see how far we can go back. Not guaranteeing we can go back all the way to 2011, but we can see what information we can gather. However, what I can talk to over the last 2 years is really with that transformation around not only looking at the foundations programming, but it's like with the sensory rooms, and it's to approach it with that and then coupling that with our social workers and supporting in social emotional learning, and then the mental health team. So this slide is really kind of like bringing together all the components to support what is necessary to support a student who is in crisis or needs additional social emotional support. And these things that we're putting into place, it's not just relying on the foundations, it's not just relying on sensory rooms or social workers or mental health teams individually. It's like, how do we work through these pieces in conjunction at the needs of the students? And a lot of this has to do with how do you make sure students are taught the process and then working through it. And then that's how things get better. So we absolutely can go back into the 2011 and just find out how much has been over time, and then to be able to give that information along with the other additional information that was requested by Madam Chair.
Ms. Abderholden.
Thank you. One of our concerns, and that we've seen in some other places, that when you eliminate seclusion rooms and we see physical holding go up, or police involvement, or suspensions, or kids being on homebound. So just kind of curious, wanting to look at that. I know Harrison at one time did have a seclusion room, so it's interesting to hear that they don't have it anymore. And does Riverbend, because it's also somewhat day treatment, they don't have one either? Okay. And how many level 4 programs does Minneapolis have?
Dr. Keenan.
Madam Chair, currently we have the Riverbend, which is our elementary program. Harrison is our high school program. We also have our Transition Plus program, which is for our students from 18 to 22. And we have our Metro program, which is a combination, but it's more for like elementary, middle school students.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
We also do JDC and adult ADC too.
Ms. Abderholden, anything else?
No, thank you.
Yes.
Dr. Keenan, I would just be curious to know a little bit more about how you structure your social workers in terms of ratio in your setting for programs, as well as your mental health team staffing. I don't know if you are willing to share information about that, but as a director of social emotional learning, that would be something I'd be really keen to see.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Keenan.
Madam Chair, yes. So this year, in particular, with our social workers, we're trying to align to make sure that we're providing the right amount of sources and resources in our all schools, and then in our special ed programs. So we prioritize in our special ed programs in terms of at Riverbend and Harrison to ensure that they have social workers there and available. So we do provide that direct supports based on the need, but we have more of a full-time aspect of our social worker for them directly. In the elementary schools, middle schools, and high schools, we allocate our social workers based on the IEPs, based on the number, so that's their caseload. We start at a 0.2 of a social worker, but generally Minneapolis is working with like an allocation of a full-time allocation of a social worker at each school, and then we support that with our IEPs too. So it's divided between special ed and gen ed at each one of the schools. And so we do, with the mental health support team, we have a group of 8 mental health support. They have direct supports for students, and so they're more of that direct link, and then they have a core group of schools that they work with, but they really kind of are targeted, and they're very focused in on certain students that are on their caseloads. So they're more citywide.
Okay. Did I understand that correctly? 8 mental health, full-time mental health providers across all your schools?
Yes, Madam Chair, there are 8 under our mental health team, but the social workers, we have over 150.
Ms. Abder-Holden?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just one other quick question. So you said the mental health supports, but I'm pretty sure Minneapolis Public Schools has a lot of the school-linked mental health grants. The community providers who are there, are most of the schools now covered at MPS?
Dr. Keenan?
Madam Chair, I'll confirm what those schools are that are receiving those supports. Yep.
Great, thank you.
Ms. Heiser?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Dr. Keenan. I have a request for data, because you already have a nice long list, so why not add to it? Sure. As a lawyer, I would be really interested in hearing from your in-house counsel if complaints or litigation has changed as far as just quantity since 2011. That would be really interesting to me while you're putting together your list. But my question is, MPS is quite a large district, and you've been doing this non-seclusion approach for quite some time. I'm curious, are there staff or are there families who have voiced that they are specifically coming to MPS or specifically not coming to MPS because of the stance on seclusion?
Dr. Keenan?
Madam Chair, we have not heard of any families that were coming or families that were coming that wanted it. So we haven't heard either way. When parents are coming and families are coming to Minneapolis, there hasn't been any initial requests that I'm aware of. I did ask around if our monitor and compliance team has heard of that, and they have not received any requests for that.
I guess along those lines, I'd be interested in knowing how many families have open enrolled out of Minneapolis Public Schools because they didn't offer the supports that they needed. If it's possible to get that data as well. Ms. Heiser, any follow-up?
No, thank you, Chair.
Ms. Sandmark, did you have a question?
Thank you, Madam Chair. On a similar trajectory of what Ms. Heiser brought up, I'm curious too about your staff. Have you experienced, I know you've been in Minneapolis Public Schools for a short amount of time, but I'm curious in any discussions that you've had with current special education staff, current paras, anybody that works with our most at-need students, has there been a desire to bring back seclusion? Has that been a desire by anybody in the staff?
Dr. Keenan?
Madam Chair, no, we have not received any request from the staff to have more seclusionary practices.
Ms. Woodward?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Dr. Keenan, along those same lines, how would you describe the kind of climate for staff around their sense of safety? In my system, for example, I'm hearing a lot of concerns from teachers and paraprofessionals around their safety. They're getting injured, and they're not necessarily asking me for seclusion specifically, but they're expressing grave concern around their own safety, and they're looking for solutions. They're asking for help. Are you hearing similar requests in MPS?
Dr. Keenan?
Madam Chair, yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about, being in other districts and experiencing that. And it seems that even after COVID, things have been escalated more in terms of students being re-entering the school system, and I know that there was a shifting and changing. It seems like this year things have gotten a little bit better in that and it's calmed down, but the last couple of years, it definitely has been not only, it's been in a lot of the districts talking about like what is safety for students, safety for staff. This year, knock on wood, it is October 8th. And so, we are continuing to monitor like what restrictive procedures that have been put in place so far this year. We will continue to do that, but we have, and we meet with our teachers union and our para union just to see how things are going when we haven't received any formal requests or concerns at this moment.
Representative Sensimura.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I wanted to speak to your really good question, Madam Chair, about open enrollment. And, while I'm definitely not an expert on seclusion, open enrollment is something that I have dug into a lot, being from a district, Minneapolis, that has a lot of open enrollment. A lot of students who live in our district are going out and trying to dig more into that. As I understand it, getting data about why families are open enrolling is really, really hard. It's just not something that we do on a statewide level. I think it's something that would be really worth looking at. So I would doubt that there would be data about, if a family is leaving to open enroll because they're not getting their needs met through seclusion rooms and MPS. As I understand it, MPS for a while, and I don't know if they still have this practice in place, was working to do exit interviews with families that were leaving the district, whether it was to open enroll or go to a charter school or private school, they would try to follow up with families to ask them. But we do also miss data if a family just never goes to MPS, or they have a kindergartner and MPS is not offering what they want. We don't get any data about why they're not going if they never started at an MPS school. So I think that's something that we as a state could look at. How do we better track that? I had two questions, and I'm not sure they're for Dr. Keenan or if anyone else on the work group knows, or maybe it's just something that we could get data about in the future. One of my questions is how many other districts across our state are like MPS and that they don't use seclusion rooms? Is MPS the only district in the state that doesn't use them, or are there other districts? And then my second question is, are there districts that are using, that have schools that are using both sensory rooms and seclusion rooms at the same time? And if they are, kind of what are they seeing from having both of those types of rooms? Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Sensimura. I think to your second question, we heard from Districts 916 and 917 last time that they do have both sensory rooms and seclusion rooms, and I believe we'll be seeing that in action tomorrow. And as to the first question, how many other districts don't use seclusion rooms? If there's anyone on the working group that has it, Ms. Heiser?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm in a unique position because we actually asked MDE for the data around districts that have seclusion rooms and do not have registered seclusion rooms. There is actually a majority of districts in the state of Minnesota that do not have seclusion rooms. In addition, this has been really interesting in the last few weeks for us at Minnesota Disability Law Center, when we have reached out to schools that do have registered seclusion rooms with MDE and they are listed as active. We have had several school districts respond that that's actually not an active room anymore. And so I'm concerned that even the data that is the most updated from MDE may not actually show us the true picture. I think there's a lot of districts that are listed that once you actually reach out to them directly, the director says, that was a typographical error, we're fixing it, we're listing it as an active. So that's my impression over literally the last 2 weeks.
I think to add to that too, not every district has the Setting 3 or Setting 4 program. So I think that, for example, districts contract with independent or intermediate district 916, 917. So they would be the provider of the seclusion room for that district, even though that district doesn't have one. So to say that the majority of districts do not have seclusion rooms doesn't paint an accurate picture with regard to whether district students have that tool available to them or not. Ms. Woodward.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So again, for those who don't know, I am the Executive Director for the St. Croix River Education District, and we serve 6 school districts north of the metro. And I think it was probably around 2015 or maybe even earlier, 2013. We also closed our last registered seclusion room at that time. And it was work we were very proud of. And for many years, we haven't had registered seclusion rooms in any of the 6 school districts that I serve. And we still don't to this day. However, we have had to report seclusions over the last few years. And vulnerably speaking, it is something that as a director and as an administrator in my system, I'm exploring of bringing that back, because of what I shared with the climate, the sharp change, like Dr. Keenan referenced after COVID, some of the needs and behaviors coming through our doors. Staff aren't safe, students aren't safe, they're asking for more. And so it has weighed heavily on me to know that there are other options that we could pursue for safety while we implement other proactive services and supports, things that take time to work. It has been something that I have been actively exploring with my system. So I think that's a unique perspective that we don't, and that was part of my interest in being on this work group, especially given some of the trends I'm seeing with our youngest students, and just the level of dysregulation that they're bringing to the space, and some of the injuries that are occurring. So we are exploring it, but we don't currently have any seclusion rooms in place in our districts.
Ms. Abderholden.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to add, whether someone has a level 3 or 4 program does make a big difference, and not just intermediates, but co-ops. So we just need to making sure that we're comparing, apples to apples. Because if a district sends their really high needs kids off to intermediate or co-op, then there isn't a need for one. Mm-hmm. And again, none of us are wanting to promote the use of seclusion rooms. It's just, I think we need to also make sure that we're looking at the data fairly to see what's happening, and also for those unintended consequences.
Ms. Hulse.
And just to underscore the point, the seclusion spaces, as they're registered in MDE, are essentially a glorified Excel spreadsheet that lives within a system. And so there isn't any sort of reminder that districts get. I think we explored this a little bit last time, but once registered, they sit. And so if a director turns over, or somebody that manages that space or those spaces for a district turns over, and somehow that information doesn't get passed to the next person, they'll sit there as registered kind of forevermore. There isn't any sort of reminder system. Obviously, that's on the district to maintain that information, but you can see how it happens. There are buildings that get demolished, and seclusion spaces are still registered. And as the person who maintains those for my district, I have my own reminders to check those quarterly, if not more often. But it's kind of an antiquated system the way that it's maintained. So it's just kind of another piece of the puzzle there.
Any other questions or comments from members of the working group? All right, thank you, Dr. Keenan.
Thank you.
Next on the agenda, we'll be taking testimony from folks who have experienced seclusion rooms or have opinions with regard to their use. First on the agenda is Molly Hofford. If you could introduce yourself, let us know your affiliation, and begin your testimony. Each testifier will get between 3 and 4 minutes. You'll hear an alarm go off when your time is almost up, and I'd ask you to finish your sentence at that time and relinquish the chair so that others can have an opportunity. Ms. Hofford.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, committee, for giving me a little bit of your time today. I am here, I'm a Lakeville mom. I have a nonverbal autistic son in 9th grade at Lakeville South High School, and I have an 18-year-old daughter. And I can't believe I just said 18-year-old daughter, because wow, time flies. But I'm actually here today to share my experience as a former paraprofessional who did the physical holds and did the seclusion room, holding the door shut in the early 2000s. So the kids I worked with, they're grown-ups now, but At that time, I worked in an EBD classroom. And a lot of those kids struggled with impulse control. They came from difficult family situations, separated from their parents, living with grandma or living in foster care, at poverty level or close, very difficult situations. And the staff that I worked with, the teachers that I worked with were amazing at figuring out what might be triggering this, what is causing these outbursts. Incredible. But you can't predict everything, can you? Some days it could be that a child's preferred paraprofessional or staff member wasn't there that day, and that was enough to just start the escalating behaviors. And once we started, with each child started using the room, it is like a dam is broken. Because once it happens, you can't reverse that. You can't go backwards. So as the days go on, it becomes a cycle. So here I am, you're maybe a second or third grader, and I'm the lady who moves you to the seclusion room, because you don't just say, head to the room. They don't just go. So you have to take them there and hold the door shut. So it changes how they approach me, the staff member, school. And it also changes how I approach them, because I'm nervous too. You become on edge. Starting that job, because I love little squirrely kids, and having it become just your shoulders tense up, and then you're just in this cycle with these kids. And so the escalations just became more frequent. And then it got to the point where we're using the room every day for some of these kids. Same kid in the room. We had a student who we had to bring their lunch to the room. We had a student who became so distrustful of us that on their birthday, here we are trying to make it a thing, and to watch his face for a minute, like, oh, they're doing something for me. And then it's like he remembered, oh, no, these are stressful people. And he just fell apart. And
Your time is almost up, if you could wrap up.
Sorry. So I'm here to say, as someone who's been injured, been urinated on, scratched, bitten, and left that job for this reason, and knowing all that, there was no good that came of it. So that is what I want to say. There was nothing beneficial from using it.
Thank you very much. Our next testifier is Kristen Jamison. Kristen Jamison. If you could, are they online? Okay. If you could unmute your microphone, turn on your camera, introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about yourself, and begin your testimony.
Chair Seeberger and committee, my name is Kristen Jameson, and I'm here to share about my youngest son. He's a bright, happy child who loves dancing to music, drawing, and wearing Hawaiian shirts every day. As a toddler, my child, I'll call him C, showed some autistic traits. C managed mild school anxiety and exhibited no behavioral issues. His first IEP was written in the 3rd grade in 2022-23 when he began receiving speech services. Nothing else was on that IEP, and by the end of the 3rd grade, he was set to graduate from speech and no longer have an IEP. At home with our family, we teach that it is okay to take a break when overwhelmed and come back when calm. We use this as a way to self-regulate and process hard situations. In December of his 4th grade year in 2023-24, when C became anxious or overwhelmed at school, his way of self-regulating was to leave the classroom. Instead of supporting him and finding ways to redirect him, the staff used restraint and seclusion, including all-day seclusion at times. By February, C's behaviors became extreme and out of character. He had moments of intense panic and sleep issues. He would try to run away from school to home and started to self-harm. At home, he was like a zombie. He was exhausted, he wouldn't dance to music, he wouldn't draw, and he ripped his Hawaiian shirts. Later that school year, in May 2024, staff secluded C in a room where he wrapped the cord from the window blinds around his neck and tried to kill himself. All of this took place over a span of only 6 months during his 4th grade year. C's educational skills and speech regressed, his growth stopped, and he lost weight. His body became stuck in a state of panic, so much so that he was vomiting all day long as a response to the terror he felt at school. The restraints and seclusions damaged any positive interactions or relationships he could have had at school. Communication from the school was terrible. There was so much that we were not informed about. At the time, we did not know how to navigate the IEP process. We were given a sheet of procedural safeguards, but we had no other help in managing behavioral issues or accessing mental health resources. The school reported whenever they used restraints or seclusion, but we wanted to know what had happened before the seclusions. Their descriptions were always vague. The school was focused on compliance only. Seclusion did absolutely nothing to address the underlying causes of his behavioral challenges and created loopholes for the school to evade its fundamental responsibility to protect students. We withdrew C from that school before the end of May, demanded behavior assessments, called for an IEP meeting ourselves, and wrote our own behavior plan for the district. We also filed an MDE complaint. MDE found the school in violation of several statutes. They didn't hold any debriefing meetings. The rooms they used to seclude C were not safe or registered rooms, and they failed to hold IEP meetings to make functional behavior assessments or a behavior support plan for his IEP. C's experience has had a lasting impact on our whole family, but with proper support, time, and therapy, he has recovered and is thriving now in the 6th grade. He once again dances to music, he draws, and he wears Hawaiian shirts every day. It's been a long, hard-won journey to get to this point, but when you get the right perspective and the right care, it changes everything. Please protect our children in creating supportive policies that ensure this will never happen to any other special needs child and their family in our state ever again. Thank you for the time and allowing me to share my story.
Thank you, Ms. Jamison. Which school district was that?
Moorhead.
Thank you. Our next testifier is Ryan Hansey. Whenever you're ready, introduce yourself and begin your testimony.
Great. Thank you to the working group for having me here today. My name is Ryan Hansey, and I'm a legal advocate with the Minnesota Disability Law Center. I primarily work on cases addressing issues related to special education and employment. Prior to my work as an advocate, I was a special educator in the Minneapolis and St. Paul public school districts, and I was once a child who went through the special education system, including seclusion. But today, I'm not advocating or speaking for myself. I'm here today to simply share some quotations from students who have shared their thoughts with MDLC about seclusion. As the state's protection advocacy agency, MDLC monitors schools that serve students with disabilities in level 3 and level 4 settings. Over the last 3 years, my team and I have toured school buildings around the state and interviewed administrators, staff members, and students about their experiences. Today, I will share some of the student statements without commentary or advocacy. Recognizing this is the middle of the school day and children may not be comfortable sharing their experiences with a room full of strangers, I'll simply read the direct quotes from 3 children. All of these quotations come from the 2024 to 2025 school year. The first student, I interviewed a 15-year-old student with disabilities enrolled in 10th grade at a federal level 4 setting with dreams of attending culinary school. The student had been placed in a seclusion room one time for 10 or 15 minutes. The school called their seclusion room an isolation room. I asked the student, what was it like in the isolation room? The student answered, I hated it. It was a tiny, tiny square room. I can't open the door. It's like solitary confinement. I don't think it's right. It's a 4x4 room with a 1,000-pound magnet door. It's claustrophobic. It was stifling, horrible. I asked, what did staff do to help you before taking you to the isolation room? The student answered, grabbed my arms and walked there. I asked, did anyone at school debrief the situation with you, talk you through it? The student answered, they didn't. At another level 4 setting, a 10th grade student was interviewed about seclusion and restrictive procedures. We asked, have you ever seen adults at school hold a student or carry them to another room where the kid cannot move on their own? The student answered, yeah, hog-tied them almost, carried them by their arms and legs. We asked, has that ever happened to you? The student answered, only once. It mostly happens to the little kids. At another level 4 setting in southern Minnesota, an 11-year-old enrolled in 5th grade shared the following with us. We asked, what would a teacher really get after you about? In other words, what would you get in trouble for? The student answered, breaking things or getting after someone. You'd go into the register seclusion room. It's a room where you have to sit there and staff are outside. There's a button to lock the door. There are magnets to keep the door shut until the staff keeps their hand off the door. You have 3 strikes. If you break all 3, you have to stay in there all day. You're able to take a bathroom break and drink from the water fountain, but you have to go straight back in there. If you only do 1 strike, you have to stay a few minutes until you calm down. The staff grabs them really intensely and shoves them in there and locks them in there. People usually get angry when they're in there, so they try to escape. I have a strong kick. I could kick down a plastic door in a few minutes. I was there last year. The door is metal. It's not going to break. I got so many 1 strikes, but this year I haven't gone in there at all. Sometimes I go in there by myself because I want to. This kid named Braden, he went in there today.
Your time is almost up. Can you wrap up?
Yes. I'll move to the final one. We asked, have you ever seen a student be placed in isolation?
I'm sorry, I meant finish your sentence. Your time is up.
Oh, okay. There isn't someone in there every day, but there's someone in there every month. Thank you very much.
All right, and before you leave, could you tell me the districts that those students came from?
I can compile that and send that to you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next testifier is online. We're going to hear from Barbara Finnegan. Could you please unmute your mic, turn on your video, and begin when you're ready.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. My name is Barbara Finnegan. I have a child who is a senior in high school this year. He is currently in a setting 3. And I'm here today to share my opinion about the seclusion rooms and our experiences with them. While the subject is and demands careful consideration, the regulated use of seclusion rooms are an essential component, in my opinion, to a safe and supportive educational environment. My child has used the seclusion rooms to benefit him. He has the opportunity to experience restrictive holds as well in a de-escalation technique. Those were not quite as successful for him. I feel a need to clarify what I feel seclusion rooms are and what experiences we've had with them. They are not punitive isolation chambers, but carefully monitored spaces designed to ensure the safety of students experiencing severe emotional or behavioral crises. When a student becomes a danger to themselves or others, a seclusion room can serve as a temporary last resort intervention, allowing them the necessary space and time to regain control in a safe, supervised setting. In our experience, the use of the seclusion room has alleviated the need for police intervention when my child has become so dysregulated at school. This not only protects the classmates, but protects the dysregulated child's well-being as well, as it protects the peer relationships my son has. In our experience, seclusion rooms are utilized with strict guidelines and clear documentation. The purpose is not to punish my son, but to protect him. For students like my son with significant behavioral and emotional challenges, traditional de-escalation techniques have not always been effective and at times have made things incrementally worse. In my son's academic history, he's experienced both restrictive holds and seclusions. Just last year, in an attempt to de-escalate a situation, my son's para chose to attempt a restrictive hold on my son. This only served to escalate him further. What started out as an escalated child ended with a broken computer, a destroyed cell phone, and a child who headbutted and broke a window in the classroom in an effort to get out of the own classroom he was in. He was not at that point in seclusion. This particular situation ended with SRO involvement. History has shown in our world that had this para allowed my son to move to the seclusion room, he would have de-escalated much more quickly. Items may not have been broken, and peers may not have also been escalated due to the events they were not only witnessing, but experiencing. Additionally, the presence of seclusion rooms can reassure teachers and classmates that every possible measure is in place to prevent harm to them. When used responsibly, seclusion rooms are part of a broader commitment to inclusivity. My child is allowed a successful experience at our local high school due to the fact that he has the ability to utilize a seclusion room. The big thing is they protect my son's dignity. If a teacher is allowed to utilize a seclusion room, my child does not have to work on regulating himself in front of his peers. He does not have to be the child who is then mocked because of his dysregulation. If he were here today, he would tell you that there are children he has gone to school with since kindergarten who still comment on a previous situation, which only causes him to relive that event. My son is now in 12th grade. Kids have very long memories. In conclusion, while we must always strive for transparency and compassion, we must also recognize that seclusion rooms, when utilized appropriately, play a crucial role in supporting our most vulnerable students and protecting our school communities. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Finnegan. Our next testifier will be Amelia Behrens. Whenever you're ready, Ms. Behrens.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the Seclusion Work Group. My name is Amelia Behrens, and I've been a special education teacher for 16 years. My teaching experience includes working in Michigan and Minnesota across federal settings and grade levels from preschool through age 22. I've worked in various roles at Northeast Metro 916, and I am now on the consultation team serving our member school districts and the navigator for the teacher apprenticeship program at Northeast Metro 916. Today, I'll be sharing a bit about my experience using seclusion with special education students. When students are intensely dysregulated, their physical presence often matches or exceeds that of the adults working with them. During extreme dysregulation, their strength, agility, and size can turn situations into major safety concerns for students, their peers, and the staff supporting them. In extreme dysregulation situations, teaching, processing, and co-regulating are not possible. Many of our students also struggle with expressive and receptive communication. Therefore, when they are dysregulated, they are not processing information effectively. Students are either in fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. In my experience, when students move into fight, one of the tools that can help them regulate in the quickest and safest ways can be seclusion. In the event that seclusion is unavailable, significant injuries have happened to staff and students, including bites with flesh removal, concussions, contusions, broken bones, cuts and scratches, joint injuries, and extreme student self-injury. In the times that seclusion has been a part of a student's plan, it has provided them a way to reduce or eliminate sensory input and provide students a safe way to pause and reset. Often this is the only way to disrupt that intense fight state that they may be experiencing. I'd like to tell you about one of my students. When they became extremely dysregulated, it was as though a switch flipped and they entered a fight state that was extremely difficult to interrupt. They quickly exhibited biting and pinching and twisting skin to the point of deep bruising. The IEP team, including the family, determined that seclusion was the best tool for supporting this student in those emergency situations. When in the seclusion room, this student's switch would flip right back to regulation. The full sensory reset stopped unsafe behaviors in a very short amount of time. Our data demonstrated that when seclusion was used in those extreme situations, we were able to get the student back in the classroom and on track within minutes. Without this tool, or when seclusion was unavailable, the behavior would go on and on, putting the students and staff in significant danger throughout the incident. Another student I supported through the MTSS team presented with significant safety concerns during dysregulation, making restraint nearly impossible without the risk of serious injury. This student would also engage in biting, kicking, tackling, and closed fist hits to staff when extreme levels of dysregulation were occurring. Despite proactive strategies and environmental adjustments, the team could not safely move or restrain this student. Working with the behavior analyst, the student's family, and well-trained staff, we developed a proactive intervention plan that taught and reinforced the use of a break space or taking a break in that seclusion room as a safe and calm place. The student practiced going there while regulated with reinforcement provided each time as a part of his schedule. Over time, he became more independent in using the break space, even in times of emergency. This approach created a safe environment for them and their peers and the staff, while also teaching the student that a quiet space away from others was an effective way to regulate.
Your time is almost done. Can you wrap up?
Sure. Ultimately, every decision we make in special education comes back to the student. Emergency interventions like seclusion are not a one-size-fits-all. They're individualized, just as our students are. Our students need a range of safe supports because their specific and unique needs are exactly why we serve them. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Behrens. Our next testifier is Sarah Lapuznik.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the committee. I am Sarah Lapuznik, and I have a son with autism who has been having violent outbursts since he was 2 years old. He was diagnosed with autism at 2.5 and has been attending a federal setting 4 school since the start of 2nd grade. To give you some idea of what my son is capable of, he once scratched off 1/5 of my cornea. He scratched my face so badly once that I looked like I'd been attacked by a rabid cat. He threw a cement candle holder at me and hit me in the head. And he's had similar behaviors at school, including once slamming an iPad into an aide's head. Just this year, he flung his own urine at staff. At 14 years old, my son is the size of a grown man, and he's very strong. So when he does have outbursts, they can do more damage. Since TONDA started at Concord Education Center in 2018, seclusion has been used very successfully multiple times to deal with his violent outbursts. It has been and continues to be a vital tool to ensure TONDA's safety and that of the amazing people who work with him. It has never been used as a form of punishment, nor should it be. I do know that at other schools and with other children, as we've heard today, seclusion has been misused as a method of punishment. The solution to this problem is not to target the tool, but to target misuse of the tool. Training is required so that staff know when seclusion is and is not appropriate. If after training, staff members are not able to appropriately apply seclusion, they need to be performance managed into another position where they are no longer working with children like ours. If seclusion is banned, as some people are advocating today, the only tool left with children like my son who cannot bring their violent behavior under control will be to go hands-on more often. With respect to my son, this will be significantly more traumatic than seclusion and will be more dangerous for teachers and aides. Outcomes for him will be worse, and there will be a much higher chance that teachers and aides will sustain injuries. The relationship between my son and his personnel at school will become increasingly adversarial rather than cooperative, and trust will be broken. The hundreds of times that my son has hit me make no difference to how I feel about him. I love him more than I will ever be able to explain. I want him to learn and grow and be the best person he can be. The people at Concord Education Center are doing a phenomenal job to ensure his success in life, but they can't do it without seclusion, because there are times when my son simply cannot stop himself from engaging in violence and putting himself and the people around him in danger. I ask you to please allow schools to continue using seclusion as a last resort when appropriate and with proper training when it is necessary for the safety of the people involved. Having said that, my heart goes out to families like Ms. Jameson's who have experienced seclusion being used inappropriately. It can be used well and appropriately and is right for some students like my son. Thank you very much for considering my comments today.
Thank you, Ms. Lapuznik.
You're welcome.
Discussion. Ms. Winship.
I want to start just by acknowledging how complicated this topic is. I come as the caregiver of a 6-year-old at a Setting 4 program who comes home and tells me how traumatizing it feels. He's experienced lots of trauma already, can probably check off every single ACEs checkbox. And then coming from an educator who for 10 years worked in a Setting 4 building and know the behaviors that happen, and hearing how seclusion can be helpful when used appropriately. And I think that's the tricky piece for me, is that it is, as we're hearing, it is often not used appropriately, and there's no accountability for it. When it's not used appropriately, it is harming young people. And I think we have to acknowledge that that is happening throughout our state. Whether, again, like I talked about last meeting about the state statute saying you can't suspend a 6-year-old, well, it's still happening. And these are gonna continue happening. So it's just, I'm in a conflicted state, and I just wanna acknowledge the complication of this.
Thank you for bringing that up. And I think none of us up here wants to see seclusion misused, and hearing some of these stories is absolutely horrifying. This has been the goal all along. What our last testifier said, I wrote down, the solution is not to target the tool, but to target the misuse of the tool. And part of what I hope we accomplish in this working group is to identify ways we can target the misuse of this tool. Because it's not okay under any circumstance to use it in ways that we've heard some people say it's been used. So I acknowledge that, but I also want to acknowledge the people who have students in school with severe dysregulation. Another thing Ms. Lapusnik said that resonated with me, despite the hundreds of times her son has hit her, she still loves him. I feel the same way. You guys all know my story. I've been attacked, I've been bruised, I've been beaten, kicked, hit, scratched, spit on, but it doesn't change the way I feel about my son. Any other discussion? Ms. Abderholden.
Madam Chair, I just want to thank everyone for testifying, and I know especially for families and people sharing their stories, that can be a really difficult thing to do in a public setting, and so I just really appreciate them taking the time to do that. And, you know, I too, as someone who's worked on this law for a long time, feel very frustrated that it's still being used incorrectly, despite, you know, our efforts to really be clear about how you can and cannot use it.
Further discussion? Yes, Ms. Sandsmark.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to also thank all the testifiers that showed up today and share your story. I completely want to agree with Melissa here on the sense of we're having the lack of accountability of seclusion being used incorrectly, I think is a major reason why we're all here, of course, but a big issue in the advocacy that a lot of the families and young people I work with are struggling with. The incorrect usage is too often, too much, and I think when we have a tool that is used so often incorrectly, I think looking at alternatives to that tool is very important. And I wonder if this work group, as well as looking at, you know, getting at the incorrect usage, I want to be also spending time on us looking at the alternatives in between restrictive restraints and seclusion. And I want to see us really talk about alternatives, because it feels to me that when a tool is being used so often, incorrectly, used for discipline, used to target children, and the ramifications of their mental health and physical abilities and physical stability and mental stability, I think we really need to take a look at how that tool is being used. Thank you.
And I would agree with you. And my concern is if we ban it outright, it's still going to happen incorrectly. I think our resources need to be focused on how do we prevent the misuse? How do we engage districts and staff in the conversation so that they are aware and have the support that they need so that they don't resort to the misuse of seclusion in ways that are unacceptable and contrary to existing law. Ms. Woodward.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think a curiosity that I have, Ms. Sandsmark, after your remarks is, you know, when we say so often misused, I'm curious the rate of misuse as that compares to the rate of proper use. And I don't know that we have that information. to be able to determine whether or not the use of the tool is discrepantly misused from the amount of times that it's appropriately used, right? We heard stories of misuse. When I heard this concept of 3 strikes, my heart skipped a few beats because I feel heavy about, like, that's not the point. Like, I was very sad to hear that experience, but I don't know how often that is happening compared to, you know, that bigger picture. And I think where I struggle as a school administrator, and I think maybe where that feeling of heaviness is so profound in this very moment, is that I don't disagree with you that we want to find alternatives. We're searching desperately for alternatives. You know, we've talked about Ukeru a couple of times here, and that's one where a lot of us have just been like, oh my, thank you, there's something else. And that doesn't change the fact that in some of our settings, there are children coming into this space so beyond dysregulated day one that we don't have a minute before something serious could happen to implement something like that. And so how do you, you know, I wrote down the phrase, creating supportive policies. What is the supportive policy for teachers, for students, for everyone involved, so that accountability is high, use is proper, you know, and everyone's safety is secured? So I'm struggling with that, but I just want to be very careful about quantifying some of that information, and perhaps that's some data that the work group could try to unpack, is that the ratio from inappropriate to appropriate use.
Yes, Ms. Sandswork.
Thank you, Ms. Woodward. Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to briefly respond. I agree that we don't have the numbers right now of the clear numbers of incorrect or proper use. I think there's a lack of oversight happening there. I'm just coming to this from a perspective of getting a lot of stories of people feeling traumatized regularly. The folks that we heard from today are the people that were willing to speak. The folks that we did not hear from today are people that are afraid to speak out loud because they've been a part of a system that allows for the use of this restrictive procedure in ways that some families, some children, and many who we have spoken to feel that they have been long-term traumatized and harmed and are put into positions that they are forever fearful of going back to that school building, forever fearful of the people that they are around. And so when I come to this, I have we have the folks, and I'm sure too on the appropriate use of seclusion as well. There's a mountain of people behind those folks that are either afraid or unwilling to speak. And I know at least on the side of the misuse of seclusion, that's a lot of the folks that we are hearing from who are terrified every day that their child will be put into this kind of position again. So that is just something I'm very aware of, and I want to make sure that we have excellent testifiers that came today, some excellent perspectives, and some really, really important, either through being a parent or a staff member perspective. I just want to acknowledge that there's a lot of people that are too afraid to speak.
And Ms. Sandsberg, I don't think there's a person on this work group that doesn't want to address the misuse of seclusion. I think all of us are horrified by those accounts. None of us wants to see that happen, and all of us are wrestling with what do we do about that and how do we prevent that from happening so no other student is traumatized in that way. No other family is traumatized in that way. We all want that. But we have to at the same time acknowledge that as a tool, when it's used properly, it has its place. We heard parents testify to that. And what I don't want us to do is discount their experiences either. Ms. Abderholden.
Madam Chair, I just wanted to share that having been on the task force, the other one at MDE for all those years since the beginning, we have a long list of recommendations to try to prevent this from ever happening in the first place. And it's just unfortunate that most of those things have never passed. making sure that school linked is in every district, especially the intermediate districts, has been a huge one. And of course, they were treated differently than the other schools. But there is a long list, including, knowing when a district is really struggling, including with physical holds, not just seclusion, really providing kind of a team of experts to go in and help. So I just want to make it clear that it isn't that we've never thought about how to prevent this. It's just that those reports, year after year, we tried to do some of the recommendations, but they just didn't take them up. And that was, again, a group of people who have been looking at the data and things like that. And I just want to also say that, as someone who tries to bring parents' voices to the table, when your child is frankly can be somewhat violent and have really aggressive symptoms, it is really hard for those families to share their story as well, because they feel like they're to blame as a parent. And so I think that's why I think any of the parents who testified today, it takes a lot of courage, whether your child, whether it was used inappropriately or used appropriately. But I think we just need to acknowledge it is very hard to come forward and share your child's story, generally speaking.
Ms. Woodward.
I think one of the things that I'm really wrestling with right now, and that's coming top of mind for me, is what is the right conversation to be having here? And one of the things that I am thinking about is when Assistant Commissioner Cordy was here last week and sharing information from MDE, and I'm trying to find the exact wording, and it's a question that I had. There we go, I found it. When we put resources to something, when we focus on that, when we funding, resources, training, technical assistance, in schools, we see things move forward. So to use a different example, recently the READ Act came to be, and direct funding was given to districts for training on the science of reading. And you should see the amount of energy and effort that is going into that work and that learning and that implementation in our system. It's impressive. It's exciting. And a huge part of the reason it is happening is because there was a policy created and there was funding attached to it, and there's a timeline and a structure around training, and here's what you have to do and by when. And yet for behavior supports, we don't have something comparable. We received direct student support personnel aid in a recent legislative session. That was a gift. We were able to hire additional staff, and that was amazing. That helped us, provide some more proactive supports. But I think the challenge we face as districts is we're limited in the resources. And I say that not as an excuse, but I say it as thinking about an example of something else that is pushing the system forward, where a priority was named, funding was attached, processes were put in place, infrastructure was provided, and we're seeing improvements in reading instruction. We're seeing real change. So I wonder if our energy is best placed at how could we provide some of those same supports in our most intensive settings so that we can prevent misuse, we can scaffold supports, we can move things forward. I think that's what's top of mind for me, because I think there's so many spaces where we agree, but what's the pathway to get us to a better place where everybody feels, where we have supportive policies? So, thank you, Madam Chair.
And I think that's an important question. I think that's something that we do need to focus on, and not just our most intensive settings, but greater Minnesota. We heard the experience of the mother from Moorhead. Some of our schools in greater Minnesota don't have the resources that they need to deal with highly challenging behaviors in their students. They may only have, maybe they don't have a setting for, or I think I read there was something that came through about a setting for that was cobbled together in greater Minnesota, and it was kind of a disaster. And I think that's the experience of a lot of greater Minnesota schools. So recognizing that the student population is the student population, and the challenges are the challenges that are going to be there, how do we support our schools? How do we support not only the most intensive settings, But every student in every school, urban setting, suburban setting, in the intermediate districts, cooperative districts, and in greater Minnesota where they don't have all those resources. And I think maybe that's where we start. I don't know, I throw that out there, but thank you for bringing that up. Further discussion? Ms. Heiser.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to thank Ms. Woodward for those words, and it really has started a thought for me. And Ms. Aberholden brought this up as well. The question around the focused resource and the focused deadlines and the accountability to those as well. And we did have this restrictive procedures work group that met monthly for a while and did have some timelines around, ending seclusion by 2026. And yet, I think we all collectively have expressed a disappointment that has not manifested in the kind of real change that we wanted to see. So I suppose my question is simply, was there not money behind that? Was there not a better focus behind that? What was the missing piece that we didn't have to make that manifest in actual change?
Ms. Abderholden.
Madam Chair, I'll be honest, the report went to the Department of Ed, every year, and none of those things were ever included in their budget proposals. I think one year there was maybe one that was included, but generally that's what happened. And we kept fighting, as you know, NAMI fought hard for schooling for everyone, including the intermediate districts, but a lot of the other changes, because we talked about directed funding. I tried to put together all the recommendations from all of the reports. I need to actually go back and help make that a little slimmer for you guys, but because I just kind of put them all in and I could summarize it probably still within the next 8 days. But there were some really good recommendations in there, because there were, especially, I would say, more in the beginning of when we all started meeting. I think it was more, people were more focused on finding solutions in a sense, rather than fighting about whether we should do this or that. It was really how do we up the training? How do we monitor what's going on? How do we create that change? So I'd be happy to go back to the huge document that I sent you and just summarize it a little better to pull out the major themes if you'd like.
I think we'd all find that really helpful, so that we know the work that's been done in the past. We're not reinventing the wheel. I don't know how much we put toward the READ Act. It was an insane amount of money.
It's a lot.
It's a lot. But it was a priority that was identified by the legislature, and it was something that we devoted money to. I don't know if anybody's paying attention to the economy or to the federal level, but the money's drying up. We're not getting the federal funds that we had gotten in the past. We just did a budget in our last session. We made cuts everywhere, which were incredibly painful, including to human services and systems and supports that support the most vulnerable people in our society. We had to cut. So where do we find the money? That being said, if we do identify this as a priority and come back to the legislature and say, look, we've worked hard, we rolled up our sleeves. We had stakeholders from every area come forward and say, this is a priority and this is a problem, and we need to find the funds to do this, and this is our plan, and this is what it will cost, and this is what you need to do. I think we have a shot at getting something done. Ms. Holst.
I'm sure I'm getting ahead of myself here, but I do think the technical assistance piece with this is just as important as the funding. And I think there are some fantastic organizations that are already in place. I mean, MDE being one of them, but like the School-Based Behavior Analysts organization that exists here in Minnesota is fantastic. They would be a partner with us. I mean, we have resources here, and we could build on the resources that exist to provide this level of technical assistance, and they exist throughout our state. A little bit of a bird walk, but I facilitate a quarterly meeting of setting for program leaders from across the state of Minnesota. It's completely voluntary. It's something that my supervisor used to do that I inherited from her. It's a come as you are. Agenda is open, just bring setting for leader things to talk about. It's an hour and a half. And this issue inevitably comes up. What are you doing? Do you use seclusion? Do you not? How are you wrestling with this? How are you training your staff? What issues are coming up for you? I mean, this is constantly a churn. How are you, PCM, CPI, UKERU, who's using it? What are you seeing? Just the hunger for these types of resources, this type of technical assistance, it is out there everywhere in all corners of the state. And so I think to be able to provide something would be incredible. I don't think it's going to cost us REDACT money. I really don't. We have wonderful partners, so I want to throw that hope out there.
Would you be willing to put together a list of these existing technical resources? It's just so we have something in front of us that maybe we can wrestle with.
I would love to.
But budget out, get a number attached to so that we are starting to talk about real solutions. That would be super helpful.
I would love to work with my colleagues over here to do that.
Yeah, we can.
Thank you. Any other discussion? Ms. Woodward.
I'm being intentional about my airspace I take up, but I do think just like drawing one other comparison to some local decisions that are being made. I think when we say the goal to eliminate seclusion by 2026, wouldn't that be amazing if we operated in a system where that wasn't necessary? And I think some of the point that schools some of us are trying to make is that removing a tool before there's something else effective in place is where we're left really vulnerable. So for example, when we were adopting UKERU in my system, we currently use CPI as our system for physical holds. And in some of the districts we were speaking to who have used UKERU, even the hospital rehabilitation type centers who use it, residential treatment centers, if you will, they said, we don't have to use physical restraint anymore because we've been using UKERU for so long and it's been so effective, we don't need to use restrictive procedures. And we're like, wow, that would be amazing to get there. No one likes to implement restrictive procedures. So when we adopted it, we kept both for now. And we're hoping that we continue to see our restrictive procedure physical hold numbers go down as our implementation of UKERU goes up, so that someday we can be like, we don't need this anymore. That's our hope, that's our goal, but we're not there yet. So for the time being, we have both. But we're still so excited for any opportunity to bring it down. And that is the spirit behind a lot of the educators that I work with and the leaders in my in the state, is just like, how can we get rid of the need for these through other really effective trauma-informed practices? But that pairing of both at one time is an important step when we're doing something new.
And I think in a future upcoming meeting, we are going to be talking about UKERU. You'll have to spell it for me. And other alternative means that districts have been using or exploring, both to fill the gap for seclusion, which has been eliminated up through grade 3, and to try to expand in just as a practice, how we can best support students. Ms. Winship.
Just along those lines, one of the articles that I read talked about, I'm just going to read exactly what I highlighted. The comfort versus controlled philosophy taught response blocking, promoted an understanding of behavioral intent and client needs, and encouraged the development of creative solutions that were alternative to restraint and seclusion. The belief was that many students in which a restraint or seclusion was used could be better resolved by a non-coercive, caring intervention from a person focused on peaceful conflict resolution who was willing and able to spend time with the upset or angry individual. Blocking has evolved into a new patent-pending crisis response method. Why can't we say it? It's the UKERU.
And I'll also add, I mean, if there was an easy way to de-escalate students and solve this problem, we would have done it a long time ago. For the mom who, I mean, I'm one too, that gets attacked by their kid. If we knew how to stop it, we would have done it a long time ago, and we would make $1 million selling it. I wouldn't even sell it, I would give it away. It's so important. When my son would get to the point where he was hitting, kicking, punching, it was like he was having a seizure. You can't talk to him, he's not seeing, he's not hearing, you're not dealing with a rational person. There is no de-escalation that will work at that point. There's nothing. Just like if a person is having a seizure and there's uncontrolled movements of their hands, you can't look at that person and say, stop shaking. Or here, I'm gonna put a calming bubble light next to you and stop you from having this seizure. That's what it's like. It needs to resolve. And as a mom who's lived with him, he's 20, he still lives at home, thank you very much. But I've seen it, I've tried everything that there is, and I know every mother and parent and caregiver out there, and the ones that we heard from have done the same. If there was the magic de-escalation process, the magic sensory room, someone tell me what it is so that we can solve this problem, because I don't know what it is. Any other discussion? All right, our next meeting is one more? No? Okay. Ms. Heiser.
Thank you. I'm sorry for the confusion, Madam Chair. My simple question is, what is this data? Where does it come from, and what does it describe?
Great question. I have no idea. Mr. Turman, can you shed any light on what these other materials are in our packets?
Not at the moment. I can follow up. I'm filling in for Andrew. Yep.
All right, let's put a pin in our materials. Why don't we all put them in our save folder, and then we'll get some clarity on what this is. I do want to point out there are some anonymous Minnesota seclusion accounts that are included that I think are relevant to what we heard today. I did read through these, and I will say that for the most part, my reaction is either A, this is misuse of seclusion, B, an inability to have a proper setting for, or an ability of the district to properly support the student, and certainly goes toward what we were talking about today. Our next meeting is October 15th at 2 p.m. in this room, Minnesota Senate Building, 1500, and there being no further business before us, we are adjourned.